The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our very first Alteryx webinar of 2019. I'm Deanna Sanchex, and I'll be your host today. We are waiting for a few more people to join, so we'll be starting in just a few minutes. So again, we'll start in about 2 or 3 minutes, and we're just waiting for a few more people to join. So hello, everyone, and welcome to our very first Technion Data Solutions Alteryx webinar of 2019. So thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to having you here on this webinar today. And I'm very excited to show you some very cool things about joins and unions in Alteryx. I wanted to add here from our slide that we first have up, just a little bit about Technion Data Solutions. So we are a full service consulting company, and we are proud partners, as you can see, of Warescape, Tableau, and Alteryx, as well as DataRobot and Snowflake, there we go, making that plural. You can see with Warescape and Tableau, we were Partner of the Year in 2016. We were also Partner of the Year for Alteryx in 2017. And we're also great partners with DataRobot. I highly recommend, if you have questions about DataRobot, feel free to reach out to us. It is a really fantastic software that actually utilizes predictive modeling and the latest R code in order to help you with your predictive models. And it actually runs the predictive models behind the scenes and then lets you know which ones might best fit your data and your project. Snowflake is really incredible. Again, reach out to us if you have questions on this as well. Snowflake is actually for data storage, and they do it in kind of a new, unique way as a pay-as-you-go data storage. So again, we are proud partners of each of these, and if you have questions on any of them, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. You can reach out to us through the website, or you can actually post your question here in the chat. So with that, go ahead and get started. I'm Deanna Sanchex. I am an Alteryx ACE, and I've been using Alteryx since 2005, actually before it was Alteryx. So as you'll hear me say many times, it is my video game. It is something I truly love and enjoy working in it constantly. And in fact, I do almost everything I can in Alteryx, from data prep and blending to spatial and demographic analyses to predictive analytics. You can actually do all this in Alteryx. And it's something that I really like to specialize in and really utilize as much as possible. My degree is in GIS, or Geographical Information Systems, hence the map behind my photo here. I do specialize in spatial and demographic analytics in Alteryx. So if you ever have questions on that, feel free to reach out to me. And you can also see my LinkedIn page here with the URL below. So with that, I'm actually going to get started and go into Alteryx and show you some really neat things about some fundamentals of Alteryx, joins and unions. So Alteryx is known as a data prep and blending tool. And yes, it is definitely that. It can really create speed to insight for you. It's blazingly fast. It runs in virtual memory. So you really can process huge amounts of data very, very quickly in Alteryx. And using Alteryx for data prep and blending is really one of the cornerstones of what Alteryx is. But as you can see here in my tool set at the top, Alteryx actually does a lot more than just data prep and blending. There's parsing, transformation tools, not only that, but in database tools where you can actually process the data within your database, including filters and formulas and joins. I'll touch a little bit about joining in database today as well. We've also got reporting, spatial, even data investigation, predictive, and prescriptive analytics as well, along with multiple connectors and developer tools, and including your demographic analysis and behavior analysis tools. So just to give a quick overview of what Alteryx is, just showing the tool set there, there's so much more to it than data prep and blending. However, data prep and blending is essential before you go into any of these other tools, such as predictive tools and so on. So to really understand data prep and blending, we're going to utilize two of the favorites tools today. So these are the join tool and the union tool. All of the tools in Alteryx, for those who are new to Alteryx, are color-coded, so you can actually see which tool set they belong to. So I'm going to actually go here and show you the join tool set. We'll actually be using quite a few of the tools today in this, and I'm also very excited because I'm going to show you a few tips and tricks using these join and union tools as well. But with the join tool set, you not only have joins and unions, but you have join multiple. You can make a group. You can do find and replace, and if there's time, I'm going to show you something really neat about find and replace using it as a join. There's also a Cartesian join tool, and then there's an append fields tool. And sometimes this append fields is a little mysterious. It's kind of, new users are like, well, how does this work and what is it really appending? And I'll show you an example of that today as well. Alteryx also has a very strong and very powerful fuzzy match tool. Might even do a webinar on that later this year. But fuzzy matching in Alteryx is very robust. There's a lot of algorithms that it uses, and it's actually very accurate in many ways. So I just wanted to show you those tools just to start with for what's in the join category. But today we're going to focus on joins and unions. And again, as I mentioned, I'll show you a little hint on a few of these things that might make your life easier as you're using these join and union tools. So I'm actually going to go here to my favorites toolbar and just pull in an input data tool. And for those new to Alteryx, you can actually just drag and drop and pull in an input data tool and connect directly to a file or database. We have lots of options here for file, SQL Server, Oracle, even other databases through ODBC and OLEDB and other connections. But right now, I'm actually just going to go to a file, and I'm going to pull in 3 different files and talk about what union really is. So union and join are different from each other. Union actually stacks data on top of each other, one column on top of another column, and I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm pulling in some data here for San Francisco, and it's 2011 data. I've got a name, a job title, I've got some pay information, overtime pay and total pay and so on, a year, a notes field, and an agency field, which is really, the county, for example. So I've pulled in this data, and I want to pull in some other data that's very similar to this, but for a different year. And I'd like to union all of those together. So with union, as I mentioned, you're stacking the data one on top of the other. You do not need a key field for a union. A key field is actually to be used in a join. So a key field is very much like, for those Excel users out there, where you have one field such as state in one of your data sets and another field which is state in another data set, and then you join on that field, state to state. With union, however, it is different. You're not joining state to state or any key field. We're actually going to stack the data one on top of each other. So I'm going to pull in this 2013 data as well. So again, you can see this is San Francisco 2011, 2012, and 2013 data. So with the 2012 data, got almost the very same schema, same field names here, same pay information, year, notes, and agency. Just like we saw in the 2011 data. Looks like the very same schema. And then the same for 2013. Got the employee name, job title, pay, and so on, year, notes, and instead of agency, it's a jurisdiction name. So what I'm wanting to do in this example is actually take all 3 of these data sets and simply combine them, stacking employee name in one column for all years, job title in one column for all years, the pay fields, and so on. So these are actually going to stack one on top of the other. If you were doing this in Excel, you would probably be doing a lot of cutting and pasting. You might have each of these as a separate spreadsheet or tab in Excel, and then you would take 2011, copy and paste to a new sheet, 2012, copy and paste that under 2011, lining up all of your columns, and then 2013, copy and paste under 2011 and 2012, lining up all of your columns. So there's a lot of Control-C and Control-V going on there when you do this in Excel. But there's something very different that you do in Alteryx, and it's really very powerful. And for me, it's excellent because it's transparent. You can actually see what's going on with your column headers and with your data when you're doing this in Alteryx. So I'm actually going to add a union tool now. So I can take the data streams with similar structures, and I can do it on field names or positions. And I'll show you what that looks like. And in Alteryx, you just simply drag and drop. So I wanted to note here for the input on the union tool, excuse me there, you can see that instead of a regular one arrow that goes into this tool, you can see there's actually 2 arrows going in. So for any tool, when you drag and drop it to the canvas and you see 2 arrows going in, that means it will accept multiple inputs. If you brought in a tool that had, say, for example, the sample tool, and it only has 1 input arrow, that means it will only take in 1 input. But the union tool is different. So the union tool will accept multiple inputs. I really haven't found a limit to the number of items you can union. I've actually had more than 50 inputs going into a union tool, and it worked just fine in Alteryx. So I definitely wanted to point out, anytime you notice this double arrow, that means multiple inputs. And the union is very good at that. So I've brought my union tool here to the middle. I'm going to drag in the very first connection. I'm just going to click and drag. You can see this labels itself as connection number 1. And I wanted to add with the union tool, the first connection that you bring into the union tool defines the schema for the output. So whatever your header names are for your first input, that's going to be the header names that come out of the union tool once you've union your data. It also determines your data types. So if I click here on my input tool, and I switch over to the metadata tab in my results window, I can see my data types. So here's my headers, my data types, and my size, also my source name. But you can see since it's a CSV, the types are all VString and 254. That's simply a default for CSVs or comma separated values, which are actually text fields, just separated by commas. So you can see here, looking at my data type, this is going to dictate what the data type is for the output. So this doesn't have to be the top input. I could easily have created my first input using the middle input. It will say input number 1. But it's just good to know that whatever your first input is, connecting to this union, that's actually what's going to dictate not only your headers, but your data types coming out of it. So I connected input number 1. Now I'm going to connect and drag input number 2. And then I'm going to connect and drag input number 3. So it's giving me a few warnings, and we'll look at those in a moment. It's always good to pay attention to your warnings in Alteryx. But before I do that, I wanted to click on my connection itself, and you can actually rename your connections. So for connection number 1, I'm just going to click on it, and over here, change the name to 2011. I'm going to click on number 2 here and change that to 2012. And then I'm going to click on input number 3, and I'm going to change that to 2013. So you'll be able to see as it's going into the union tool that each of these, now that I've labeled these inputs, and again I've done that just by clicking on the wire itself for the connection, I can actually now go into my union tool. So I'll show you what this looks like. I'm going to go over here to data. There's a lot of options for configuration of your union tool. There's auto-config by name, auto-config by position, and manually configure fields. My favorite one is manually configure fields. Even if all of these inputs have the very same headers, very same name, and I feel confident I can say auto-config by name, I always switch it to manually configure fields just to double check what's going on with the data. And I'm glad I did in this case because there is something different going on here, which is why those warnings were popping up in my results window. So you can see here, these are my inputs. These are actually the connections that I renamed. If I didn't rename these would be number 1, 2, and 3 for the connection wires coming in. But when I've manually configured my fields, you can see that 2011 and 2012 data have lined up. So they had the same schema, they had the same titles, everything was in title case with a capital and then lowercase letters after that, and so on. It found year in notes and lined up year in notes column just fine, which is really good, but that's also because it was simply just one word. It didn't have an underscore in it. But for input number 3 for 2013, with these lowercase values and this underscore, it thought it was a new field. So it did not line up the field under the other ones. So this is one reason I always use manually configure fields, just to double check what's going on with my data. The nice thing about Alteryx, especially the union tool, is you can actually move these fields. So I can actually just manually click on the name and click on my arrow and just move this name over and line it up. How amazing is that? In the old days, you had to write code to do that, and it was not very fun to try to write code and move all of your column names over and get everything to line up. And again, you can actually move more than one. So I'm going to click over here on job title all the way to total pay here. And if I hold down the Shift key and double click, I've highlighted all of these fields, and now I can move them all at once. So I'm just going to move these over. and make sure they line up properly. So I've got total pay, job title, other pay, and then total benefits I've lined up under benefits. So your field name doesn't even have to be the same or even remotely the same for you to line it up. It actually can be manually moved over, and you can align all of your columns the way that you prefer and the way that the data needs to be lined up. So I'm going to click on total pay and benefits, move that one over here too. And then I'm going to click once on year, hold down Shift, and double click on Notes, and just move those over at one time. Next, I'm going to move jurisdiction name over under agency. So I know that they're actually the same information. It's really just the county name or jurisdiction, but agency and jurisdiction name, of course, are not spelled the same, but again, I can line those up. I can just do this with manually configure fields, which is really nice. So now I've got all my fields aligned, one on top of the other, did a bit of moving around on that, and then I can actually click Run and show you what that looks like. So I'm going to add a browse tool here, and go ahead and click Run, and you can see the amount of data coming through. I'm going to click on Show for my connection progress, and that way I can actually see the counts and the file size coming through the data. To get to this workflow configuration where you can click on Show for your connection progress, click on anywhere in your white space, and it'll bring you to your workflow configuration. And then just click on, instead of Show only when running, click on Show for your connection progress. And that'll give you the number of records and the file size coming through for every single tool in your workflow. So you can see here I've got about 36 to 37,000 records coming through for each one. They're all unioned, so I should have about 110,000 records altogether. These are unioned, as I mentioned earlier, one on top of the other. So in order to really see what that looks like, I'm going to open this up, and now you can see got the very same information. Again, input number 1 is going to dictate what my headers are and the data types for every single column. But if you look at the year, as I scroll down through these years, you'll actually see going down to 2012 data as it comes through. And a bit of scrolling there. I'm going to move my little webinar anchor here so I can get to that scroll. That's the hard part there. See if I can move that over. It's actually not letting me move it, but those things happen during webinars. But as I go down, it'll scroll down and you'll see 2012 data and then 2013 data for the data sets coming through. And then I've got everything lined up one on top of the other, which is really excellent in this. And again, with unions, you're actually stacking the data one on top of the other. There wasn't a key field where I've put these together. It wasn't that I had to join employee name to employee name or year to year. I'm simply stacking the data one on top of the other, and then you're actually having the data come out as one outsource with the same columns all together. So here we go, finally getting up to 2012 data. There's my scroll bar, finally. So now you can see 2012 in the year, and then as I scroll down, 2013 for the year as well. So that was simply the manually configure fields option in the union tool. I can actually go over here and switch from manually to auto config by name. So if I do this auto config by name, it's going to match what it thinks is the correct names. So only use this option if you're sure that each one of your inputs has the very same headers, very same spelling, everything's going to match up. I'll click on this option and run it, but you'll see something different coming out of the data. So I'm going to open this up here, and you'll see I have employee name and job title. If I go through here, it matched 2011 and 2012 data, but for 2013, as before when we saw in the manually configure fields, it put the data over as new records coming through. So it's a good thing that I did the manually configure fields, because otherwise, if I had just relied on alignment by name only, this would not have worked actually. I have a lot of nulls for 2013 under the main headers, And then I have my other headers with the underscore as new fields. There's another option. You can do auto config by position. So this is nice even if your headers are named differently from each other, such as here where I have 2012 and then 2013 data. If I'm very sure that column 1 is employee name, column 2 is job title, and so on, I can do this option of auto config by position. This should only be used if all of your columns are the same number and your data is always in the same position. So like employee name, column number 1. So this works well for that option. Again, you don't have to have the same headers or the same names, but it will put it in the auto config by position here. So you can see now I've got notes, I've got jurisdiction. However, if I can scroll over to this, there is an agency option. So my jurisdiction and my agency did not line up with each other. So I can see my notes here. Let's see if I can get this scroll bar to work. So there's agency. And what it's doing is it took the 2013 data and lined it up under 2012. So at least I have the option of auto-config by position. Again, only use this data if you're very sure that all of your columns are exactly in the right order to be stacked one on top of the other. It's one of the reasons that even if I do auto-config by position, I first look at manually configure fields, make sure what's going on and what has not matched, and then with auto-config by position, make sure I have the right count of columns before I use this option. There's also another option here for not only manually configure your fields, but when you do the auto-config by position or by name, you have some other options that come up. So when fields differ, you can get a warning and continue processing the records, or you can get an error and stop processing the records. This is really useful if your inputs might change a little bit as you're unioning the data. So for example, if you're pulling from a data set from a shared network, or you're pulling from a database, and somehow the schema's changed, somehow a new header got added and you didn't know about it, using this option for error and stop processing records would be really good to let you know that, oh, something's changed in the inputs. I need to stop this process and take a look at it. You also have an option for ignore, continue processing records. So if you don't want to see all those warnings, you can just choose ignore. There's also output all fields, or output a common subset of fields. So for example, if I did auto config by name, and as we saw before, not all the names match up because of input number 2013. We have these underscores here. If I did auto config by name, I can say output all fields, which we saw before, and it would push all the fields together, and we would have null values for those that did not match. So as you can see here, I've got employee name, job title, and so on by an underscore, and these did not match, but it is outputting all the fields. If I choose output common subset of fields, it's only going to show me what matched in that common subset of fields. And so now I can just see that year and notes was the only common subset of this field because the names did not match up. So again, if I go to manually configure fields, only year and note were the common subset of fields if I did not manually configure it. There's also another option here. So there's set a specific output order. So for example, if I wanted 2012 data to come out first in the top rows, I could simply click on the data set and click up and move it to the top, and then 2012 would come first. If I wanted 2011 to be last and 2013 or the most recent data to be first, I could simply click on each one and move them using the arrows. So there is another option for setting a specific output order. So that's a quick overview of the union tool. Again, I always encourage to manually configure your fields first, just so you know what's going on with your data. It's very easy to assume everything's going to line up, but it's always a good practice to check and make sure that it actually is lining up appropriately. So next we're going to go and start a new workflow here and talk about the join tool. So with the join tool, this is where it's basically like a VLOOKUP in Excel. You're going to join on a key field. So I'm going to bring in some data. This is going to be some California entities data in a YXDB or Alteryx database format. You can see I've got an entity name here as I scroll through, an entity ID, which will be the key field that we join on, some other data such as county name and city, and then some fiscal information and due dates. I'm going to pull in another data set here, and this one's going to be some pension funding data. So I'll pull this one in. You can see another entity name and an entity ID, which will be the key field that we match on, and then they've got valuation date and actuarial data and so on. So I want to match these two together. The important thing to remember when you're doing a join is to actually check your data types. So joins can only be made on the same data types. And a data type is something such as a string or a number, a Boolean, a date, or a spatial object. So if I click on my input and switch from the data view to the metadata view, I can instantly see my data types as we showed before. So you can see here I've got an entity ID of a double for this first input, but my entity ID is a V-string for my second input. So I need to adjust one of my inputs to either a string or a number so that we can join both of the data. I've decided I'm just going to do this one. Going to modify the one for the entity data. Looks a little easy to modify. And to do that, I just brought in a select tool. So a select will let you not only order your inputs, but you can change your data types. You can even rename. So right here, I'm going to click on double and just change that to a V-string as well, just so I can join these two key fields together. I'm going to bring in now the join tool. And the join has two inputs, as you can see, L for left and R for right. So I'm joining in the data, one on each side. In the join tool, the data coming in on the left is going to be the very first data in the stream, or what you will see from left to right. And then the data coming in on the right will be what's appended or joined on the right. So as unions worked up to down, top to bottom, where you're stacking the data, as we saw here, joins actually work joining left to right. So that's why you have a left input and a right input. So when you join your data, when you look at your output that I'll show in just a moment, you'll see all the left data coming in first, and then joining on the key, and then all of the data coming in on the right. So there are options in the join. I'll show you first the specific fields option. So if you join by specific fields, again, this is like a VLOOKUP, you would choose from the drop-down of your list of fields which of your key fields you're going to join on. So we're going to join on entity ID, and you can see if it's spelled exactly the same on the right input, it will find that as your key field. So I've got entity ID on both of my joins. And then I've got the data on the left and the data on the right. This is very much an embedded select tool, so it's very much the same as a regular select tool here. It's just embedded inside of your join tool. So I can actually deselect entity name if I want to. I'm going to leave it on just for this first showing of it, just so you can see what it looks like. But I can actually, if I expand this window here, I can actually change my types, change my size, rename the field, and this will apply all the way downstream, and I can change the description as well. So again, it's just like a select tool. You even have options here. So I can do select and select all, or select and deselect all. I can sort on field name. I can even move highlighted fields to the top or bottom, add a prefix or suffix, and I can deselect duplicate fields. The deselect duplicate fields, which is hard to say, is actually a really great feature when you're using a join. You may be joining two data sets that have exactly the same headers, and all you need is one field out of that second data coming in. Deselect duplicate fields under your options, which is found here, will deselect all the duplicate fields that are repeated on the right and then you can just simply check the field you need to continue downstream. I also wanted to show you what is part of a join. So it gives you these nice Venn diagrams in your join tool to show you what's happening with the join. So the J output is what usually you're most interested in when you're joining data, and that's called an inner join. This is showing only what joins between the left input and the right input. So the J output here will only show what joined between the two. There we go. Your left or left unjoined is going to show what didn't join coming in from the left, and I'll show you an example of that. And then your right unjoined is what didn't join from the data coming in from the right. So I'm going to show what this looks like. I'll actually right-click on my join and then add all browses, or you can do a Control-Shift-B if you've clicked on the tool, and it will add all of your browses nicely aligned and distributed, so you don't have to worry about moving them yourself. I'm also going to click on my white space, get to my workflow configuration, and change my connection progress from show only when running to show. This is really important when you're using the join tool because it's important to know if any data is not truly joining on the left or on the right. I'm going to run, and now you can see my counts. So you can see there were 142 records in the pension data and 162 records in the entity data. 142 joined, so this is my inner join, so 142 records here found a match in this data set also. However, 20 of the records coming in on the left did not find a match out of the entity data, so we'll explore that in a moment. But it's always a really good idea to explore that and do a join and make sure you add a browse to your left and your right outputs just in case something didn't match. It's really easy to assume everything's going to match and then move forward with the rest of your workflow, but sometimes things are not matching, so it's essential to really explore that first. First, I'll actually show you what the data look like in the join. So again, in the join tool, this J output is showing what joined between the left input and the right input. This is only showing what matched between the two. And I left the entity ID in here on the right so you can see where the right data begins. So here's all of my data coming in on the left. I've got my entity ID here, and then the data from the California entities data on the left coming in. And then as I scroll across, you can see my right entity name and my right entity ID. And now I've got a match on my entity ID. So 10355 is matching to 10355. So as long as there's a match, it's pulling in the data left to right, left data from the left inputs coming in, and then data on the right is coming in on the right. So here's our valuation data and our actuarial data coming in on the right. So it found a match with every entity ID. In this example, it's a one-to-one match, but you can actually do one-to-many or many-to-many matches using the join tool in Alteryx. And I'll show you what that looks like as well. But here we might explore what didn't join on the left. So we have these 20 items that did not join, and here's an entity ID. So we've got an entity name and an entity ID. None of these entity IDs found a match in the pension funding data coming in on the right. So anytime data doesn't join, maybe you're expecting it, but if you're not expecting the data not to join, it would be good to look at those entity IDs, for example, and think, well, are they mistyped? Is there a missing leading zero, for example, or something else that might be causing this data not to join? So it's always good to explore your data and see what joined and what didn't join and why it didn't join. Often we have a reason to actually join this data back in, so we may still want these missing entity IDs downstream and in our output data. So how do we actually incorporate that with the ones that actually did find a match in the entity ID? And a really easy way to do that is the union tool. So I'm going to pull in the union tool, and I'm going to pull in the joined data first. Again, whatever you connect to first in your union tool is going to be what dictates the headers and the data types coming through. Next, I'm going to pull from the left unjoined, And I'm going to move this so you can actually see those wires a little better. So I've got an input coming here, number 2 from the left, and the input from the joined. I'm going to just manually configure those fields just to double check, make sure all this data is lining up. So you can see what does match between the left, left unjoined and then all fully joined. And then you can see what didn't match here. So this will be what's coming in on the left unjoined. So it's not going to have values for this one. So I'm going to add a browse for this and click Run. And then you'll see what the data look like. So one way to check and see what joined and what didn't join is to take some data on the right side and sort. And I'm going to sort on valuation date. That way you can actually see those 20 entity IDs that did not join in this. So I'm just going to select here and do valuation date in an ascending order and add a browse tool. So there should be 20 that don't have data for the right data coming in, and then there should be 142 that do have data. So I'm going to open this window here. And then you can actually see as I scroll over, there should be a valuation date here. Let's see if I can grab this scroll. There we go. So there are 20 records, as you can see here, that have null values for everything coming in on the right. So I do at least have my entity ID, so joining, but I don't have any of the other data coming in on the right. So at least I've pulled in that data for these missing 20 entity IDs that did not find a match. And now I can use those downstream. So that's a very quick overview of the join tool. I was going to show you an example here of what looks like when you have join multiple. So I'm going to actually change this data from the pension funding data unique data, where there's unique items, and I'm just going to bring in the full pension funding data. So again, it's the same data set, but this time we have quite a few options. We've got a lot of entities data, a lot of transaction data, and multiple repeats of that entity ID for each one of these. So you can see here I've got the entity name repeated, the same for these entity names. So here I'm doing a many to one match. I'm going to go ahead and run this. And you can see what this looks like. Those same 20 entity IDs from the left input are not joining. They didn't find a match, just as we saw before. But for 1,447 records, it did find a match, and it's one to many. So we've got all these entity IDs with transactions on the left, and then as you scroll through, you can actually see it's found that match, and it's got the data coming in for the fiscal year on the right. So it is possible to do a one-to-many match here. So we've got this one item here, it's matching multiple times to the data coming in on the right that has separate fiscal years for each entity ID. So it is possible to do one-to-one, one-to-many, or many-to-many on your joins as well. The next example I'm going to show is the join multiple. So you may need to do more than joining two inputs. So the usual join tool, or the regular join tool, has just a left input and a right input. But you may actually want to join more than two things at one time, and that's where the really nice join multiple tool comes in handy. So I'm going to bring in this join multiple tool, and again, you've got these double arrows coming in, so that means it accepts more than one input. So I'm going to actually connect to this county data and show you what this looks like. So there's county data here. It's just got a county name, a county key from the FIPS code, state name, and average spend. This is our spend data. We've got the same information, name and key and state, but a customer count for this field. And then for this one, we've got a name and key and state, and we've got some population data for this one. I want to join all three, so I'm going to join on the key field. And that unique FIPS code is a nice key to join on. Again, with joins, it's left to right. We're not stacking data one on top of the other. We want the data to join left to right based on this key field that is in each one of the data sets. I have an option with this join multiple to actually give me an error on multidimensional joins of more than 16 records. So that is really useful. I usually leave that on because if you're doing a many-to-many join, you can have a huge join going on that is multidimensional, and you start creating lots of data all of a sudden, sometimes gigabytes worth of data without realizing it, because every time you're joining many-to-many, this one key is finding a key in all the other data sets, and then it's repeating for every single data set that you use. And it's really easy to start generating lots of data in this join without realizing it. So I always leave this error on multidimensional joins active, and that way I know if something's happening and I've accidentally done a many-to-many that's generating a huge amount of data for this. I'm going to actually do a browse here and show you what this looks like. So you can see I've got 3,000 records for each of these. I'm going to turn on my show for connection progress. And then in my join, I've got a little over 3,000 here. So I'm going to look at the data and see what's happening. So again, this is different from a union. If I were unioning this data, these numbers would be about 10,000 altogether for my output. But since I'm joining and it's on the key field, it's joining record to record, left to right. So here I've got input number 1, name, county key, state name, and the average spin. Input number 2, it repeats again. It's joined on this key field. And for every 01001, it's finding a match. And then it's found input number 3, and then the population. I'm leaving these records in here so you can see what this looks like, but if you wanted to take out the input 3 name and input 3 key and everything that's duplicate, you could just simply go here and uncheck name and key for each one, or you could do options and deselect duplicate fields. And now my name, key, and state name for all of those duplicates are actually checked. However, I want to look at the data and show you what happens when it's not finding something that matches in each one of these. So here I've got state name, and if I scroll over here, there's some nulls going on. So if I look at Denali in Alaska, I can see that it didn't find a match in input number 2. So there's no customer count per county for Denali, Alaska. However, it found the population data for Denali, and it matched that one. So if you do this join multiple, I always give a caveat because not everything may join. It's really easy to assume everything's going to join in your join multiple, and I'll show you a tip and trick on how to check that just to make sure that things are joining the way you think they're joining. But first I want to show you how you get rid of these nulls. If you only want to see data that matched completely between all 3 of these inputs, just go to your join multiple and check this box for only output records that join from all inputs. So this is only going to show me only what matched. I do want to say beware, because it may not bring in everything. There may be some things that are not matching. So here I've got my output. Now I've got a name and a key, state name, and my columns for spend, customer count, and population. But again, there's only 2,911 records. So something didn't completely match in these. These are only the ones that matched throughout the entire universe of all 3 of these together. So a way to check this, and I always recommend this, if you're doing a join multiple, it's important never to assume everything's going to join perfectly. I always bring in a join and just join the first 2 data sets first. And I'm going to join here on the key field. And then I'm going to add all browses, and I'm going to run. So with this little test, it's telling me only about 2,900 joined. There's 125 that's not finding customer count in the same county that has average spend. It's also good to do another join down here. So I'm going to say, let's do customer count, to county population, for example. And you can do all these other multiple joins like average spend to population. But it's really good just to do this, run the data, make sure you have a key field. Here we go. And run the data and then double check and see, aha, there's 72 that aren't finding a match here. So as I always say, it's good to know your data. Always go in and double check your joins before you rely on the join multiple. The way to see what's not joining in the join multiple is uncheck this box, make sure it outputs all records from all inputs. And I'm going to sit here and select all for this so you can see the names. And again, just like before, as you scroll down, you'll start seeing some nulls, and you'll know what didn't join in there. So it's a really good practice to just double check and make sure that things are joining the way you want them to. Next, I'm going to do an append. And so for the append example, there's something really cool that you can do actually with your append. And I'm going to bring in this data. I've got some transaction data. And you can see a customer ID, number of transactions, and I'm going to join this to my customer data. I've made a change here so that I can join some data here, and I'm going to join on customer ID. I've changed my sales to double so I can actually do some calculations on that in a moment. Again, I'm going to join this data, and I've got my join here. I'm going to join on customer ID. And it did not find it on the right, and that's because it's spelled a little differently. The names for your key fields do not have to even be spelled remotely the same. You can actually have it be spelled very differently, very different field, but if that's your key field, you can actually match them. So now I've got my join going on. I'm going to right-click and add all browses. I'm going to click here and make sure my connection is in show mode. And I can see what joined and what didn't join. And I've got some data here. So you can see I've got a customer segment, and I've got 4 customer segments here. What if I want to actually take all of the sales data for the customer segment and then calculate a percentage of sales from that customer segment? It's a really quick way to do that, and I'll actually do it with the append fields tool. So first I'm going to summarize the data. And I'm going to take the data based on the customer segment from this joined data. And I'm going to say, let's see, let me group by customer segment. And then we're going to do a sum of sales. So now I've got my sales per segment. I'm just going to call that total segment. And I'll run, and you can see what the data look like here. So now I've just got my segments and my sales per total segment. I also want to do total sales just so I can actually use that in my division and calculate my percentage. So I'll just do sales and then sum. And I'm going to call that total sales. I'll click run so you can see this just in the interest of time here. And here's my total sales overall for the year. So now that I've put these together, I can do the really neat append fields tool. I'm going to take this append fields, and I'm going to connect each of my inputs. So the thing to remember about the append fields tool is there's an S for source, as you can see here for my source data, and a T input for target. So your source is what's being appended to the target. So the way I remember this is that your source is the smaller amount of data. You definitely can append more than one field, but again, be warned that can be a multi-dimensional join, so you can end up appending a lot of data to a lot of targets all at once. So there's something to prevent that. They've got this warner error on too many records being created, so error on appends of more than 16 records. I usually leave that on. I've actually been known when I first started using Alteryx to ignore that, just set that to ignore or allow all appends. leave for lunch, and then get a call from my DBA in IT saying, hey, what's going on? You're generating gigabytes worth of data here very, very fast. And that was when I was not paying attention, and I had many sources joining to many targets. So just a little, notice there. Be sure and leave your error on, unless you're a very advanced user, error on appends of more than 16 records. And that will help you control that data as it comes in. So again, S is for your source, and I remember it with alliteration of S is for smaller, and then T is for your target. So I'm going to add a browse tool and show you what this append looks like. And this is just a really small append, but an example at least. So now I've appended the source of total sales to every single record in my target. So now I've got a total segment and a total sales, and I can set this up to calculate a percentage. So I'm going to add a formula here, and I'm going to add a column and just call it %. And then I'll do a really simple calculation, and the calculation will be total segment divided by total sales times 100. You can see I've got a data preview here, and I'm going to change this to a fixed decimal. I'm going to make the precision 6. It's a percentage. It can actually handle smaller than that, and a scale of 2. So a scale is 2 decimal places. And then I'm going to click Run. And now you can see my percent calculation. So consumer has 20% of the total sales. Corporate has 37%, for example. And I did that using the Append Fields tool. I know we're starting to run out of time, but I did want to show you a really neat tip and trick. I'm going to go back to this union tool. So every now and then you may want to have lots of unions going on, not just 3 coming in. And I'm always excited. I was so extremely happy when I found out how I could do this. So first I'm going to delete these streams or connections here. I'm going to swipe over these, and just for this example, I'm going to do a Control-C for copy and a Control-V for paste. I'm going to put this in. I'm going to Control-C, click on the white space, and Control-V, and paste these in. So you may have somewhere like 20 or 50 inputs that you want to union all of a sudden. There's a really quick way to connect all of those instead of dragging one at a time. You can actually right-click on your union tool and view possible connections. So here are your connections going into your union tool. I'm going to select all of these for my input connections, and I'm going to say input data going into my union. I'm going to keep it wired, and then I'm going to say, let's connect. Let's see, there's my input connections. And I make sure and check union for my input and click connect. Now all of these are connected all at once, and I didn't have to drag once to connect that to the union tool. I think I hear a lot of cheering going on there, because that's definitely something I did the first time I found out I could do this. And it's really wonderful just to be able to right-click on this. You have to configure your output, of course, but view possible connections, and then you have all of your connections available. And you can actually click on your connections and add them. So I know there's only a few minutes left, but I definitely wanted to open this up for any Q&A. Feel free to post your questions in the chat as well. Let's see. I'm looking to see through the questions here, just in case. And I really don't see any questions so far exactly about the union tools. I do see a +1 on the Fuzzy Match webinar, so I will make notes of that. And also I wanted to ask if you'd like to post in the chat or the questions what you'd like to see for webinars for 2019. Definitely open to your suggestions. I've heard items such as not only Fuzzy Match, but reporting, and also using the parse tools. So we have a lot of great parse tools here. There's only 4, but they are all very powerful, and you can even get into regex or regular expression tools as well. So I am going to go ahead and put up the PowerPoint that shows my email address. Please feel free to email me if you ever have any questions on this or if I can assist in any way. And again, reach out to Technion if you have any questions on Warescape, Snowflake, Tableau, Alteryx, or any of the other items that we are partners with. We really like to help, and we're always available to assist you in any of these questions. And I really hope you enjoyed some of the cool tips and tricks about the joins and unions today. Again, feel free to reach out to me at dsanchez@technionusa.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also find me on the Alteryx community. My handle there is @Deanna. So feel free to look for me on the Alteryx community as well. Again, feel free to post in the chat or in the questions what you'd like to see for future webinars. I do these monthly, and I look forward to seeing you all, or at least having you on the call for the next webinar in February. Thank you again, and we really appreciate you joining us.